Hello, everyone. Thank you for participating in this podcast. It's Hacking Education, a podcast that seeks creative solutions for an education system that is falling short of meeting the demands of the current world. Today, we have the honor to be with La Doctora Marta Pulido, and right now she works at the University of Antioquia in Medellin. I'm very proud to be able to participate in this podcast, and I want you to tell me a little bit about your institution as well as yourself. What is that you have been doing for the past 20 years?
Thank you very much, Mario, for this invitation. I'm always proud and willing to talk about the University of Antioquia. I think it's a great institution that has allowed me to develop academically and has been the house of knowledge for many people in Antioquia. And for the last 20 years, I've been teaching translation at University of Antioquia.
So, what is translation? Start from that because I don't know what it is.
Well, it is, there have been many definitions. It is difficult to define, but sometimes it has been defined as a bridge between cultures, and I think it's a definition that I don't like too much. There are scientific explanations or definitions, like it is knowing very well one language and one culture and knowing the reception culture too. But for me, translation is an act of friendship.
Okay.
I have always defined it as an act of friendship, maybe because I've been teaching translation. So for me, but the moment of the very act of translation for me is friendship. Even if you are translating a dead author,
Okay.
you become so acquainted with the author that this author becomes your friend. It's a ghost, but it's your friend.
And you value that friendship. So I like to elaborate a little bit on that because it is a fascinating concept. I never thought about it that way. Okay. So when you are doing a translation, then you are really talking to a friend in a language to tell others in a different language what you and your friend had a conversation about.
Exactly. A translation, as you said, is like a conversation.
Okay.
A conversation. And of course, you understand so well this author that you want to tell the others what he said. Yes?
Okay.
And luckily, today we have so many tools to understand a text when we have a problem. But precisely when Saint Jerome translated the Bible,
I love Saint Jerome.
He didn't have internet. He didn't have dictionaries. So he went, when he had a problem with a passage of the Bible, he went to the desert. He started praying. He took a stone and he hit himself. No, until he bled. So it was a way to say, well, what I'm going to put in this language for people is your truth. No, he was telling God that.
So well, let's elaborate a little bit on that. So you feel like Saint Jerome was communicating with what God was thinking to regular people?
Yeah, it is supposed to be. No, it is supposed to be. We can say, for example, that Moses was the first interpreter.
Okay.
He interpreted the table, no? The table, the 10 commandments. And we say, from which language? No? Sometimes I ask my students, from which language?
From the language of the gods.
From a God language, okay?
Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah.
What is this the importance then of the languages and let's go to education right away, because I know that obviously you like the institution. You've been teaching translation for how many years now?
20 years.
20 years. And I know that you also have worked on the translation. So what is the importance of this translation in the educational system?
Okay, first, education in languages is very important. Yeah, because we in Colombia, we are not only Spanish speakers, but we have 65 native languages, for example.
Wow,
65.
just in Colombia we have 65.
Just in Colombia, we don't know them. We know very little, but these are also our languages. But for us, it's a kind of foreign language. which is not fair. It's not fair for our people, but it is like that. And besides, we have all the other languages, no? English, French.
Are we losing a lot of these knowledge from the? I'm talking. I'm thinking as the indigenous cultures and stuff like that. Are we not? Are we losing knowledge? Are we losing opportunity to learn from these cultures because we don't know their language?
I think so. I think so. Although now, UNESCO has declared a decennial of autochthonous languages. So people are starting learning languages. Yes, I have started studying in Vera. I don't learn very much, but because it's a whole. You don't only learn words, but you learn a cosmovision.
Okay,
Then
because that's absolutely the beautiful part about this podcast. We're gonna get to it because I want to see the transmission of knowledge from those cultures, which are our cultures, because obviously, I mean, we're Colombians, so from our cultures, there's a lot of information that has been lost in translation, and then Spanish has been imposed into our culture, and then now, for some reason, me and I guess many others assume that the language of my culture or our culture is the Spanish language, when other languages, like you say, how many, more than 50, were our native languages. What happened to me and to those languages? How can I learn? How can I get knowledge and information from those cultures back into me?
Mhm. Well, I would say that we speak Spanish. We speak Spanish, but I think our culture is a mixture, a hybridization of the cultures that were here and what we have learned from Europe, no?
So it's like a melt of all those languages.
Not the language, but the culture. Our culture. Our culture is not Spanish. We speak Spanish, but our culture is not Spanish.
Oh, I like that a lot.
That's the difference. That's the difference. And I think we took many years and centuries to recognize that these languages deserve to be learned, that we also can learn many things from them. And it is incredible, but because in the 18th century, when the Spaniards came, were colonizers here, they came before, but in the 18th century there was all this movement of medicine and new science that came to America, and the medical doctors that came from Spain, especially, they learned from the Indians, and there is a beautiful book about medicine in the 18th century in Colombia, and it is the mixture of these
cultures.
Yes, and sometimes they brought medicines from Europe, but they also learned that here some headache, for example, was cured with a plant or so on.
Because I mean this association of this knowledge and this combination and these mixtures of whatever techniques they have and stuff, and I'm having the same situation today because I feel like I'm a global citizen. I may have, so I'm working on my third European citizenship, which is many countries altogether. So yeah, in reality, I speak Spanish. I studied here in Medellin in Colombia, and then I went to the United States, and I was thinking, you know what, English is the language of knowledge, and today I'm realizing, you know what, maybe it's no, maybe there's other languages and other experiences and cultures that have tons of knowledge that I want. How do I keep searching for knowledge in other languages? And you speak more than two languages. So how is your journey learning from these other experiences?
Yes, I think maybe the most important thing is not all the languages you learn, but the attitude you have toward languages, no? And that's something, if we go back to
the friendship.
To the friendship and to the autochthonous languages here, I think is the attitude. We see our indigenous people different today. We see they are important. We see they have something to teach us. We have always seeing that from other cultures. When we go to England, when we go to France, we know that we're learning so many things, not only the language, but all the things, the culture, the wine, the food. And it is true that English is a beautiful language. No, I say I love
I
authors
love English too, yeah.
like Shakespeare, for example, and I think it's beautiful to read Shakespeare in English. It's so beautiful. But I heard a British scholar saying this very few weeks ago. He said, we decided that science should be written in English. We decided and we imposed that to the world.
Yeah, in reality, because of media and the
Yes.
story, the way. So then the TV started, the English took the TV, and then it started presenting all this. And today we have a similar issue because YouTube and you and me have to do other podcasts in Spanish, and maybe we can do some in Portuguese, because the reality and what I'm afraid of is that yes, science had been imposed in English, but what about the language of love? What about the language of the ancestors? What are those? Okay, so I'm thinking, yes, for one particular subject, which is easy to capitalize, we have the English language. But what about for the other intelligence, the other emotions, and everything else? Which language would you recommend, or would you say is the language of love, for instance?
Well, it has been said that French is the
There
language
you
of
go.
love. And yeah, but for example, Romeo and Juliet was written in
In
English.
English. Okay,
So
okay.
it's difficult to decide that one language is, but okay, I don't dislike that
You-
to say that the French is the language of love. But coming back to this scholar, he said, okay, we imposed English as the scientific language. We thought we were going to bring the whole world to us, but what we did was to build a wall. We came inside, and we don't know what is happening in the other cultures, the other languages that produce science and knowledge in other languages is not available for the English speaking people, because most of the English people speaking people, United States and Britain, they don't like to learn other languages because everything comes to them in English. But this is not true completely. Many things are not written in English. So that I heard him, and I like that, because in reality we are doing this podcast in English, why not? But we can write in Spanish scientific articles, why not? In Portuguese, why not? When we write something in Spanish, I remember one of the first books that I translated, Filosofía de los Acontecimientos, a book on the philosophy of sciences by a French researcher. When the Universidad Nacional and Universidad de Antioquia proposed him to translate the book into Spanish, he was so happy because he said, everybody from Mexico
Spain.
to Patagonia and Spain is going to read me.
Wow.
So
So I mean, one of the things and the reason why I do some of the podcasts, or the majority of the podcasts in English, is because today, if I'm not mistaken, about 1.4 billion people speak English as a first or second language today. Probably that's going to change based on the growth of the African countries and other. And again, and other cultures that are growing really fast. So the reason why we do this in English is because I want to create awareness. Awareness, which is the name of one of my companies, that the one that sponsors the podcast, is I'm going to try to make sure that everybody in the world knows that this is happening. And in how, yes, at the beginning, maybe the English as the scientific language, as the research language is okay, but yes, is building a wall. It's excluding all these other knowledge, all these other researchers, and all these other people that are bringing in tons of information and tons of value. Let's talk about something that I think is interesting, is the fact that whenever I'm testing, I am tested in English. Okay, most of the tests not only give the student like an IQ test, some math tests, and math is a little bit easier. But when it was for me physics, physics was really difficult. I mean, both in La Bolivariana, where I got to study engineering, um, I was so good in physics. I mean, I was the physics dude, okay, when I was at the Bolivariana. And then I got to Georgia Tech, and then I was really good in calculus. I was really good in descriptive math and many other linear algebra, but physics, I was in dynamics. It was so difficult because all these problems, they you have to grasp the entire concept. And I was grasping some words, but in reality, I never got to the actual question the way that it was intended to be. So I did very well in the ones that were numbers, but when it was in actually lots of context and text, I did really bad. What is the importance of testing, and how do we try to make sure that the test is testing the actual knowledge of the person and not the language?
Okay, when you bring that problem for discussion, I'm thinking of multilingual education. A professor in a school, in a university, should know the origins of his or her students, no? If the students is Hispanic, he should know that maybe you could, I don't know, translate the instructions or something like that, because as you said, he knows. What he doesn't understand is the language, no? And this thing about the language was something that changed the methodology of teaching languages, which for a time it was forbidden to use Spanish, for example, in English lessons. It was forbidden to use the language of the students to explain a structure or something. Today, we realize that the student has a level of intelligence as much as you as a professor. The only thing is he's learning a language. That's the only thing.
Okay.
So you can explain as a teacher, you are welcome to use the native language of the student to explain an English structure.
It's again, I think that the knowledge and the concept of learning can be in your dominant language, and it's gonna make it easier to you for you to go ahead and learn another language. Um, I want to touch on that because YouTube now is the largest educator in the world, and for some of us, you and me, which we haven't said that you have lived in many different countries, but for you and me, it's easy to have biculturalism and understand the language as well as the culture. But some of the people that they learn the English language, but they don't have the opportunity to be in an English speaking culture. What can you tell them? So, how can they get the information, get the knowledge without having to experience the culture? How can they do that?
Well, you can up to a certain point. At certain level, I always tell my students, because I teach languages and translation, they should go and live the cultures somewhere. French culture or Portuguese culture, English culture, because the experience of living, for example, the day-to-day life in a city, work, be with a family, it is very different from the books, from what you learn from the books. Of course, I am surprised, for example, precisely how translation can give this level of experience that the other hasn't lived. For example, I am surprised to see Proust, which is an author that I love very much and that I read in French, but I'm surprised to know how much about the French culture through Proust people have here who have read Proust and who have never been in France. So it is, you see, is literature. Also.
But I love that because we go from you say translation many times, and you know that the word translation, but I'm so confused because when I became a certified interpreter, I say translation, and they say no, 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 no. We don't use the word translation. You can only say interpreter, okay? And then now I want that transmission. So look at this. Whenever you say that somebody in Colombia reads an author, and then it starts living some sort of experiences that are autochthonous of France. It tells me that there is a transmission of or transaction of that culture. Is like, yes, it was a level of friendship, then a communication that gets put in here without having to go to France. How is that possible? How can you transfer the culture through a book?
Well, I think is I don't know. I couldn't say this kind of magic is the magic of literature in my case, no, in what I know. But I think it's also the willingness to communicate, as you said, the willingness to transmit,
To share sort
to
of the
share.
friendship experiences?
Exactly, to share what something we like. For example, most of the famous literary translators started with that. They liked so much an author that they wanted to share this author with people who couldn't read in their languages. So it's as we came back to the friendship, but it is also yes, is the willingness to share and the willingness to continue learning, because when you show somebody a path to a culture, you are also responsible for continuing
The path.
the path or continuing
You open a door now, show me the entire thing.
Exactly,
Wow.
exactly.
I like that position a lot. That you say that you've been teaching for 20 years, okay? How long you been actually doing translations or interpreting these friends communications? How long you been doing this as a profession?
Okay. Well, because I have been teaching translation, I have had the exercise of translation, of course. So at the same time,
Okay.
But in the academic, we make the difference between the translator, who's the one who translates novels. For example, this is one of the books that I have translated. I have translated only written novels or articles. I have never been an interpreter like you.
Okay.
Yeah, so you
the
interpret
translation has to be written.
Exactly. Translation
Fantastic.
is written and interpretation is
Is
oral. Of course, we have the other concept of interpretation. When you are reading, you have to interpret in order to translate.
wow, that gets even more. What's the best book that you have translated?
Well,
Or not the best, because I don't want to say the best, but something that really mark a point in your history.
okay. Yeah, I'm going to talk then of about Agatha de Medellin.
Okay.
Agatha de Medellin is a novel that was written by a French author, Jacques Jouet. Jacques Jouet. He came to Colombia, and he's a poet and a novelist, and he belongs to a group that is called Ulipo in France. So they make certain rules to write, and they do crazy things, and that's very interesting. He had come to Colombia the year before I translated his novel to write poems, and it was called Poemas del Metro de Medellín. So he got together with two Colombian poets, and they went on one way and the other of the metro, and they stopped at certain stations and they wrote a poem. So he wrote his poems in French, and the others wrote it in Spanish, and then the Alianza Francesa published a book. He came the next year for a proposal of writing Agatha de Medellín, writing here Agatha de Medellín, but he doesn't speak Spanish, he doesn't write Spanish.
Okay.
So it was a book fair, Feria del Libro en el Jardín Botánico, and I was called to translate him. And it was literature. I said, well, yes, that's what I do. Why not? And I went there. I didn't have time. We were going to have dinner the night before, but this was in Medellin. I live in Rio Negro, so I didn't stay for dinner, so I didn't have the time to talk to him, like to get to know him a little bit. So the creation of the novel was like this, and the translation. The writer was sitting in a table. I was on the other side. I had a computer. He had a computer, and he was writing. He was creating the novel, and I was translating it.
Right at the
at the
same
same
time.
time. I had never done that in my life.
Okay.
I had never done that. There was
Do you think that was easier because you had him to see his expression and his passion when he was writing? What do you
Well,
think? Was it easier or harder?
the first we did that during 3 days.
Okay.
It was 3 days. So
That's exhausting then.
yeah, the first morning when we finished, well, I'm a grown-up person. I couldn't say, this is horrible, I'm going to run away. I couldn't do that. Besides, this was being transmitted on big screens outside, and people passed by and people saw us working. And I said, the first thing is horrible. My students are seeing my mistakes because the first draft is always
Yeah.
full of mistakes. And when we finished, we went to have lunch. And I said to him, I'm not able to continue. I didn't think it was like that. I'm sure I'm not able to continue. I know another colleague that is very good. Maybe we could take turns because it was very
Exhausting.
tiresome. And he said to me, no, let's have lunch, let's talk, and then we'll talk about this. And then I realized, having lunch, that we have had the same literary education because I studied in France. He had read the same authors that I had read. He liked the same authors that I had read. And
so there was no better option than you to do this.
He said, it has to be you. I said, oh, in the afternoon, I realized then that when he was writing something, I said, oh, he's saying something about Beckett. And I knew he was saying something about, so I knew how to deal with that. Or I feel this is Molière, or this is Proust, what he's mentioning, something like that.
Wow, that was a fantastic story.
A lot. So, but the students in Brazil, when I was teaching there, once they asked me, what is the most difficult translation you have done? I said, this one, because I thought I was not going to be able to do it. And then,
but it's probably the best one too, because you had the concept and everything.
It was wonderful. After 3 days, I think I was about to go to the hospital. He was so happy. He said, I finished my novel. I'm going to rest for a month. And the next day I had to go to the university to teach. I said, I cannot go to. Okay. And when I was in Brazil, my students asked me that. And I told them the story of Agatha.
Oh, wow.
And they said, let's do an Agatha de Florianópolis.
Oh, really?
I said, why not? So we contacted the author and we do Agatha de Florianópolis. The beautiful thing about Agatha de Medellín is that Jacques Jouet didn't know many things about culture in Medellín.
Okay.
So when he was writing, he asked me questions. So he said, can I say that Agatha went to this neighborhood? Or I said, yeah, maybe not. Maybe the
next one. So it's really the novel was written by both of you.
I helped him. I gave him some information.
Yeah.
I gave him some cultural information that he needed. So when I went to live in Florianópolis, which is also a very particular place in Brazil, and probably the most peculiar thing about Florianópolis is that most of the people are not from Florianópolis.
Okay.
It's from all over the country.
They call them the United like a melting pot.
It is like a melting pot within the Brazilian people. And when they said, let's do a translation of Agatha de Florianópolis, I knew we had to include all the culture from Florianópolis. And there was only one student who was born in Florianópolis. Her mother was born in Florianópolis. So this student was our guide. Our cultural guide.
Was he also a French-speaking student, or you had to do the French?
We translated it from the Spanish.
Oh, from the Spanish?
From my translation.
Oh, fantastic.
My translation.
So tell me a little bit about this thing. Whenever you do such a great translation, how are the credits? What credits do you get as being a translator? What is that for people that are watching this podcast, like educators or people that are going to school? What are the credits? What are the opportunities for a job or for any type of other professional development?
Mm-hmm. Well, responsible publishing houses, the responsible publishing houses, they give the credit, translated by. When, for example, this that I did in Florianópolis, I appear like the coordinator of the translation. because we were many. There was a group of students. I have done various group translation.
Okay.
So I am the coordinator, but we are all translators, and they appear in the credits. Yes.
Wow, there's a lot
Yes.
of different phases of translating. Now, if you had to tell mostly the people that, not only the students, but your colleagues, your professors, your teachers, and let's just start from elementary. What would you tell your teachers and then parents for the elementary school kids? What do you tell them they should do in order to plant a seed of language in their kids? What would you tell them?
Well, I think it's just be fair with the origins of, for example, the story they are reading. For example, if they are reading Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, just tell them that it was originally written in Arabic or in Sanskrit. We are not sure very well which is the language, but it was not written in Spanish. No? So if you tell them that, so what you're reading is a translation, they are conscious. But I was recently in a meeting with the National Planning for Literature in Colombia, and there were literary professors there.
Okay.
And I always talk about translation. It's a how do you say that? Something that I have.
No, it's what you're passionate about.
Exactly.
So if you're passionate about a subject and you want to make sure that all the people in the universe have, you know what, for people like you, I get passionate about things like this. Okay. I never thought that this subject was so fascinating. And after you tell me the story about this, you can tell me a couple of anecdotes that you have, because you got me really excited about languages after I heard your stories. But just go ahead and continue on with what you were saying, and then we come back.
Yeah, and in this meeting, so there were professors of literature from all over Colombia, and librarians, and promoters of book fairs and so on. And I said, well, maybe, and publishing houses, I said, maybe the most important thing is, and I am the only translator there, so when they gave me the minutes to say, I said, just put the name of the translator on the cover page. This editorial house, which is Spanish, they do it.
Okay.
So when you show the book to your students, you said, this has been translated by.
Okay.
This is Kafka translated by. No?
Okay.
So the
Which Franz Kafka is a fantastic author.
Yeah, exactly. And he has many translations. And when we were in the coffee break, some professors told me, I have never told that to the students. I never told that to the students. I look at the book, I don't even see who is the translator. I just go on with the story.
Because maybe there's also a need to understand the life of the translator. So, but let's finish.
Of course.
Let's finish with a book that I know that you probably know, which is The Little Prince. Okay, for kids, because we're gonna go from kids, and then we'll go to Kafka, that I think is a little bit, I don't know, 10th grade. Somewhere like my adolescence, and so The Little Prince. What do you think about this book for kids?
It's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. And I think just some people say that you should read certain books at a certain age. I don't agree.
Read that one every year.
I don't agree. I think you can read anything you want. No, many kids read the Iliad and the Odyssey when they were kids.
Yeah, and they learn. Yeah, because that in many of my podcasts, many have something to do with both of those books. The hero's journey from Ulysses is something that I'm very passionate about, as well as another one of my podcasts, which is Empowering, deals a lot with goddess and situations that are similar. But so now, high school students. Okay, we went to elementary, high school students. Why is different languages important in their education? Why?
Well, because knowledge cannot be condensed in just one language. That's the first thing that we have to tell students and that we have to all know. Say,
That is a good, so we can do a whole podcast just on that because, and some people think that this language, the English or Spanish, comes and imposes certain knowledges, excluding the other knowledge from other languages. So you do think that knowledge is more inclusive the more languages have knowledge?
Of course, the more languages you speak, the more knowledge you have because you have so many different things. One thing, when Spanish came to colonize us here, remember that we are always told that they came with little mirrors. Today we say a little mirror like this, that was something worthless. Well, mirrors were very expensive.
Okay.
If you look at the history of the mirror was created in the Arab countries. They were the ones who had, and we have stories in Europe where somebody from the monarchy paid with a great extension of land to have a whole mirror, to have a.
So you think they were doing a fair exchange?
They were doing a fair exchange. They were
What a
bringing
story.
mirrors. They were bringing mirrors, and mirrors were like a jewel. Mirrors were, not everybody had a mirror. Not everybody had a mirror.
So that is wow. That is such a great story because it does put things into perspective. Maybe the Spaniards were not that bad after all. Maybe there's so many other stories that are bad, but that one in particular probably brings some story. Do you have any? Let's just start from a good story where you think that knowing more than one language helped you professionally.
Oh, of course.
I want to hear that.
Yes. But even learning a language like English, the language that is spoken in the United States and in England, because when I left Colombia, I had just finished my high school, and I thought I spoke English because my father taught us English at home.
Okay.
And I think we spoke American English. That was in any case, when I left my home, my parents' house, I didn't go to the States. I went to England. I was in love with Shakespeare since
You're still in love with Shakespeare.
still-
I know that.
So I wanted to go to England, and it was so easy to go as an au pair that I said I'll go to. And I was completely convinced that I spoke English until I arrived in England. I didn't understand anything. I spoke, they didn't understand me. I was so frustrated
I can imagine.
that for a year I remained silent. Then, when I was learning all these theories of teaching of languages, I learned that there is a silent period when you are learning a language.
Okay.
And for me, the silent period was 1 year in order to reconvert what I have learned, the American English, what my ear was used to, into the British English. So, of course, when my silent period ended up, I could speak. No, I could speak I could speak easily, let's say, and understood. I understood.
Do you think that by your father teaching you vocabulary and many other things, do you think that helped you in England or you didn't?
Oh, yeah, of course. I could read.
Okay.
I had no problem. I could read. So as I was in this silent period, I went to the libraries and I read.
Yeah.
Read. And as I like theater, I went a lot to the theater. And I could hear this, I could listen to this. It's difficult. It's very difficult. It's not the news. The news you could easily pick them up, but the theater language is more difficult. So it helped a lot.
Do you think, so let's say some forms, because now we're moving into the college. So, because I like the podcast because you can see some expressions and you can see some people, and by seeing and hearing, I feel that you can learn more. Now, you mentioned theater, and whenever you are in a theater experience or in a movie or something like that, then you capture not only the words, but you also see the action. So talk about how much you want for your college students and for not only your students, but college in general, to be able to learn different languages and associate knowledge from different cultures, because I think that there's something that you and me talked about a little bit before the podcast. So what is the importance of them learning multiple languages and then associating multiple knowledge from different cultures?
Yes, it is. It is very important to learn that my world is limited. That's very important, and it helps a lot to your personality. If I know my language is limited because there are so many languages and they have so many different concepts in different languages, um, I know that I'm not the only person in the universe. I'm not the most important. There are many other
Some
languages.
languages are more limited than knowledge. That I like this.
I think so. I think even for example, when we know how science was transmitted in Europe, well, the scientists had to use a lot of Arabic language, Arabic words or Greek words. They just had to put them, Latinize them in order to make them
Makes
no,
sense.
to make their sense, and they had to explain them. Of course, new concepts, new elements. They had to explain. They picked them up from the other languages because one of the richest languages we had is the Arabic language.
Well, let's talk about that. What do you know about? Because what kind of proximity do you have with that language?
Well, not much. Only the reading of 1001 Night.
Great book, anyway.
A great book. And well, I was in Saudi Arabia for a congress too. And I am very interested in this culture because their language is very rich. No, even to say good morning for them is almost like a prayer. So
Wow.
the language for them is very meaningful, very meaningful. And they had this today, for us today, I think so many things have changed in religion because of political reasons, not because of religious aspects. But many things, they had this kind of combination between devotion to the gods and sensuality. This is something very oriental, no? It's
Okay.
Arabic, it's the Indians, no?
Yeah.
And today we think that women cover themselves because they don't want to show the course. But we see in India, for example, the goddess showing the breast in a church, in a temple.
Kama Sutras, temples. Yeah, I understand.
Exactly,
No,
exactly.
I mean, every time I dig more deeper and deeper into the subject, I'm more amazed. I mean, just if anything is to be learned from this podcast with you, is that language is smaller than knowledge.
I think so.
I think that is just a
think so.
fantastic phrase from this. That's going to be the title of this podcast, okay? And now, to finish up with something funny, okay? Tell us, a couple of anecdotes that you may had wherever you knew that you messed up with a language, and then maybe another anecdote where you know that because you knew a language and a culture, you were able to succeed. Period. Tell me one that it was funny where you're like, oh my gosh. And another one that you're like, you know what? Because I know this, I was able to X.
Okay, maybe I'm going to tell you because when you are in England, or in my experience, I only wanted to speak English. As I told you, I had this silent period when I was sure that I had the perfect words.
Okay.
So I think I didn't make many mistakes in England. And in France was the same thing. I didn't have a great knowledge of French when I went there, so I was very careful. But when I went to Brazil, because we think that Portuguese is such a familiar language, I didn't go either with a good level of Portuguese, and I there talked. I talked to people, and even if you don't speak very well, they understand you. But well, then I got myself organized and I learned good Portuguese. But I remember one of the first things, I was invited to a dinner.
Okay.
And this is beautiful when you come as a foreigner and you're invited to
Friends are
dinner.
important for you, and,
Yeah.
and all these type of
Friends
gatherings are
and
good for you.
food
Yeah.
and they tell you this, how this is
Cheers,
prepared.
cheers for that. Cheers for that. Cheers for that. For friends and food and wine.
Okay. And it was delicious. The food was delicious. And I said, qué comida exquisita. Exquisito in Portuguese is horrible. Exquisito means horrible. I never forget that. I never forget the face of everybody. I said, how stupid of me. Okay, my goodness. And a good thing, for example, was that I had never been to the States until this anecdote. And I asked for the visa. I don't remember if it was, I think it was here in Colombia. And I wanted to have a visa for some years, but I'm never prepared. Maybe we are never prepared for the question they are going to ask you and so on.
This podcast is like that.
Yeah.
You're never going to be prepared. We just ask you whatever.
But I'm not so scared with you. With the consul in front of me, my knees were trembling. And she was looking at, I had already come from England and so on. And I had come from, I had already studied Beckett. I had studied Beckett. I had a sort of diploma on Beckett or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but the consul was looking at my curriculum, and I had not so much money in the bank. I said, she's not going to give me the visa. And when she saw Beckett, she told me, you studied Beckett? And we started talking about Beckett.
That was it.
And when we finished, I said, I have the visa.
Yeah. So you were able to use the language as find some, I don't know if it's synergies.
Yes, and some equilibrium, no?
Wow, yeah.
Of that you don't know where it comes from. It comes from it is knowledge, no? It is the energy you have around knowledge, also around the harmony that you have with languages. Besides, Beckett was a bilingual author, so his works sound so well in English, but they sound so well in French too. So it was something like, I said, yes, I'm going to have the visa.
Good, fantastic. So anyway.
So if somebody asks me, what is the use to read Beckett? I said, to get a visa to get a visa.
You want to go ahead and go to the United States? Read French.
Read Beckett.
No, but then, okay. This is the first time that I finished the podcast by asking you to tell your students, okay? Because usually I talk to the professors and the parents, but today, because of your background and because I know how much you love your students, I want to see if you can finish by telling your students that friendship that you have with the language and why you think that they should start that friendship with the languages.
Well, I think my students know that, and they know that the actual act of translating is an act of friendship. That's what I try to do. Usually, in every group, I try to do a group translation, and when we start doing the translation, they translate different fragments, and I said nobody is going to translate the fragment best than the other, because the translation is going to be ours. So every fragment has to be the best possible, because we are going to see what is there. You are going to ask me, and we are going to do the best translation. So I think this is so important. And I go back to my experience in Brazil, because I did that here before I went to Brazil. But when I went to Brazil and I was going to do Agatha de Florianópolis, the students were so amazed, so happy. And there was one student, he didn't want very much to participate in the collaborative translation, and he was good in French. And so he said, I don't want to participate in this translation. I don't think this works together. I said, well, then you can read the book in French, because I had also in French, and you can help us. You read in French, you translate from the French. Well, he started doing that. And of course, with every question, with every problem, he was alone.
Obviously.
Only with me. Okay, he asked me, okay. But in the other group, we were all together trying to solve a problem in Portuguese that even for the Portuguese was a problem of knowing the culture of Florianopolis. So finally, he integrated into the group. And I think this boy learned something, no?
Wow.
He learned that. He learned
Because
that.
and then I know that we're getting a little bit longer than I anticipated, and so thank you very much for all this time. But I had a conversation with Simon, your nephew, and then we were talking about collaboration and how in the past scientific collaboration was so bad because you're like, oh, I'm not going to teach that person what I know because then he's going to take the job from me. So I think that one of the most important things in the podcast that we have discussed is how technology brought in collaboration. There's a story where these computer programmers were designing this software, and after 6 hours of waiting for the software to be printed, at the end was one word: error. So then what happened is they sat together and then they were waiting another 5 hours for the software to print. And they're like, you know what? I have 5 hours. Let me take a look. Oh, you know what? I had the same issue and I solved it this way. And that collaboration changed the entire world, or the scientific world per se. And today is used in many of these software where you can write a book and then in the same document, 5 people can be collaborating at the same time. So I think what you're saying right now ties into beautifully. So a hack on the educational system will be the collaboration aspect of it.
We don't need to be the first. We need to be good all together.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thanks
Thank you very
much.
much. I think this is a
Thank you.
fantastic podcast, and hopefully everybody watches it and comment and tell us what they think about that.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
And
much.
cheers for the last time.
Cheers. Okay, thank you.